It was supposed to be an easy drive home. I'd taken this shortcut before, a rural highway that cut through some countryside, avoiding the traffic jams. But this time, I must have missed a turn. The sun was setting, and the road ahead was narrowing. No more streetlights, no more familiar signs, just endless trees pressing in on both sides. I glanced at my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, just when I needed GPS the most, it failed me. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I could find my way back. It wasn't that big of a deal, right? But as the minutes ticked by and the sky darkened, the isolation began to weigh on me. I hadn't seen another car for what felt like hours. The silence outside felt wrong. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just me and the hum of the car's engine. That's when I saw it, a dirt path branching off the road. It was barely visible, overgrown with weeds, but something about it caught my attention. Maybe it led to a house, or at least somewhere with people who could help. It seemed like my best bet. I turned onto the path, the car bumping along the rough ground. The trees here were so thick, they blocked out the last bits of sunlight. It felt like I was driving into a tunnel of darkness. After a while, the path came to an abrupt end in front of an old, rotting house. My stomach knotted up at the sight of it. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Broken windows, peeling paint, and a front door hanging crookedly on its hinges. But before I could even think about turning around, the engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I muttered, trying the ignition again. Nothing. Dead. Panic set in as I realized I was stranded, alone in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my phone, but it still showed no service. I was stuck. I stared at the house, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, someone lived there. I didn't have many options. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. The cold night air bit at my skin as I walked toward the porch. Each step felt heavier than the last, my nerves on edge. The boards creaked under my weight as I pushed the door open. The inside was even worse than I expected. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled damp and rotten. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, along with old newspapers and what looked like stains. Dark, unrecognizable stains. I walked further inside, every muscle in my body tense, as if expecting something to jump out at any moment. The house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard it, a faint noise like something scraping against the floor. I froze, heart pounding. It was coming from deeper inside the house. I wasn't alone. I strained to listen, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or a creaky old floorboard. But the sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't my imagination. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor, but I forced myself to turn toward the hallway. And that's when I saw it. At the end of the dark hallway, something shifted. A shadow, too tall, too long. It moved slowly, unnaturally, its limbs hanging in a way that wasn't human. My breath caught in my throat. It noticed me. I don't know how, but I knew it had. I took a step back, the floor creaking loudly under my foot. The shadow froze, its long, twisted body still for a moment. And then it moved. Fast. Before I could think, I was running. My feet pounded against the floor as I bolted for the door, throwing myself outside and slamming the car door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. But somehow, by some miracle, the engine roared to life. I floored it, speeding down the dirt path, never daring to look back. The trees flew by in a blur, and my heart didn't stop racing until I was miles away. Even then, I didn't slow down. I still dream about that shadow sometimes, the way it moved, the way it chased me, and I still don't know what it was. But I know one thing for sure, I'm never taking that road again. I had been driving for hours, trying to make it to my destination before midnight. The interstate had been a blur of headlights and taillights for most of the evening, but as I turned onto a quiet highway, everything changed. The road was empty, stretched out like a ribbon through miles of barren land. Nothing but darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. It was supposed to be a shortcut, one of those roads you take when you're trying to avoid traffic. But as the minutes ticked by, the emptiness became unnerving. My car's dashboard clock blinked 11:34 p.m., but it felt like time had slowed down. The farther I drove, the more isolated I felt. as though the world beyond the highway had simply vanished. I turned on the radio, but it was just static. My phone had no signal either. Perfect. There wasn't a town or a gas station in sight, just miles and miles of road swallowed by the dark. I started to feel uneasy, as if something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself it was just nerves, just the creeping loneliness of the road playing tricks on my mind. Then I saw them. Figures. 2 of them, standing in the middle of the road. From the dim glow of my headlights, they looked like 2 people. A man and a woman dressed in clothes that were far too light for the cold night air. I slowed down, unsure whether to stop or keep going. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. They weren't moving. They stood completely still, side by side, staring ahead, their faces hidden in the shadows. I pulled the car to a stop several yards away, my heart hammering in my chest. The figures didn't react, didn't acknowledge me at all. They just stood there, like mannequins placed in the middle of the road. I honked the horn. No reaction. I flashed the high beams, hoping to startle them into moving. Still nothing. My pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at me to drive around them and not look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if I stayed. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I weighed my options. Suddenly, the woman turned her head slowly toward me. Her face was pale, expressionless. Her eyes, empty and dark, locked onto mine through the windshield. It wasn't the look of someone in need of help. It was a cold, calculated stare. The man didn't move, his head still facing forward, as if he hadn't even noticed me. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, steering around them as fast as I could. My heart raced as the car sped past, and in that split second, I swore I saw the man's head turn as well, but I didn't dare look back. The road stretched on in silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures standing in the middle of the road again. But there was nothing. Just the empty highway disappearing into the distance. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead that I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I pulled in, parked, and sat there for a moment, trying to calm myself down. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty parking lot. It felt safe, familiar, but I couldn't shake the lingering dread that something was still wrong. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the gas station, my body still tense. The clerk inside gave me a strange look as I entered, probably because I looked pale and shaken. "Long night?" he asked, his voice casual. "You could say that," I muttered, trying to shake off the unease. I grabbed a bottle of water and made my way to the counter, my mind still replaying the sight of those figures. As the clerk rang up my purchase, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something waiting for me in the shadows. "Everything all right?" the clerk asked, noticing my unease. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired." As I paid, I asked him a question I immediately regretted. "Hey, do you know if there are people walking on the highway out here? Like hitchhikers?" The clerk frowned. "Not out here. It's too dangerous. You're lucky if you see another car pass by this late." I nodded again, trying to brush off the feeling of dread. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the thought. Those figures, they weren't normal. They weren't just people. And the worst part? As I pulled out of the gas station and merged back onto the road, I checked my rearview mirror one last time. They were there, standing on the side of the road, watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, leaving them behind in the dark, hoping they wouldn't follow me.